Hey guys, before we start, quick disclaimer, none of what you're about to hear is a joke. None of it is made up. These were real inventions research seriously pitched in serious meeting rooms and approved by very serious people. The only problem is, they were spectacularly stupid. In this list, you'll see science doing its absolute best, logic quietly clocking out, and confidence sprinting several miles ahead of intelligence. Some inventions were meant to save lives, some were meant to improve daily life, and most of them ended with the same realization: wow, we really shouldn't have done that. So buckle up, because this is history reminding us that humans aren't lacking intelligence, we're just really bad at asking one simple question: what if this goes wrong? 1. During World War II, when the US military looked at Japanese cities packed tightly with wooden houses, they reached a very scientific conclusion: this place burns easily. And from that moment on, an idea was proposed in a meeting that no one stood up and walked out of using bats as weapons. The plan sounds reasonable if you stop thinking halfway through. Strap tiny timed incendiary bombs onto bats, release thousands of them at night, and let nature do the targeting. Bats naturally seek dark enclosed spaces like attics and rooftops. When the bombs go off, the city ignites from the inside. No pilots, no guidance systems. Biology handles everything. On paper, it was a masterpiece of warfare and ecology. In reality, there was one small issue. Bats had no idea they were part of a military operation. During a test run, several bats escaped early. They didn't fly to the mock enemy city. They flew to the safest place their instincts could find: the American base. They hid in hangars, fuel depots, and barracks roofs. Then the bombs went off. The base caught fire. The general's car burned, equipment burned, and the project ended in complete silence. Not because it was immoral, but because it turns out living weapons have free will and bat loyalty extends only to the warmest available shelter. 2. Around the same time, the US military faced another problem. Missile guidance systems were expensive, complicated, and unreliable. And then someone asked a question that really should have been laughed out of the room. If machines can't be trusted, why not use birds? That's how Project Pigeon was born, completely serious, fully funded, and staffed by real scientists. The idea was to place pigeons inside the nose of a missile. In front of them, a screen showing the enemy target. As the missile flew, the pigeons pecked at the image of the ship. Each peck sent a signal adjusting the missile's direction. Peck correctly, the missile stays on course. Peck wrong. Well, that's between the pigeon and fate. The terrifying part: it worked remarkably well in lab tests. The pigeons were focused fast and more consistent than early electronic systems. The problem wasn't technical, it was visual. No general wanted to stand before Congress and explain that national security now depended on 3 pigeons inside a flying bomb. The project was canceled not because it failed, but because it was impossible to say out loud with a straight face. A rare moment when technology didn't break reality, just became too ridiculous to accept. 3. During the Cold War, the CIA believed no idea was too insane if it could help spy on the Soviet Union. And that's how Operation Acoustic Kitty came to life, a project that sounds like dark comedy today, but was dead serious at the time. The concept was simple: turn a cat into a mobile surveillance device. The CIA spent around $20 million in 5 years surgically implanting a microphone in a cat's ear, a battery in its abdomen, and an antenna running along its tail. On paper, this was cutting-edge espionage technology. In practice, they had successfully created a cat. On the first field test, agents released their 4-legged operative near a park bench where targets were talking. The cat walked forward confidently for a few steps, then did what cats do. Best walked straight into traffic. A taxi hit it. The mission ended in seconds. 5 years of research, tens of millions in taxpayer money, and the entire surveillance dream was crushed by urban transportation. The CIA later labeled the project not feasible, which is a polite way of saying they forgot no amount of training can make a cat care about national security more than staying alive. 4. In World War I, Russia decided that if regular tanks weren't terrifying enough, the logical solution was to build one so massive it couldn't be ignored. Enter the Tsar tank, a towering war machine nearly 3 stories tall, with enormous front wheels like Ferris wheels and a design that looked like a monster drawn by an overexcited child. On blueprints, it crushed trenches, crossed rough terrain, and terrified enemies simply by existing. In reality, it rolled a few meters forward and sank straight into the mud. The engine was too weak. The weight was too much. The tiny rear wheel was completely useless. The tank just sat there, stuck and silent, as if wondering why nobody asked the most basic question up front. Does this thing actually move? No battles, no victories, just a massive machine abandoned in the mud for years before being dismantled. The Tsar tank wasn't destroyed by enemies. It was defeated by terrain and mathematics, proving once again that in war, bigger doesn't automatically mean smarter. 5. During World War II, as German U-boats sank Allied ships faster than Britain could replace them, desperation reached new heights. At that point, any idea sounded acceptable as long as the presenter spoke confidently. That's how Project Habakkuk was born, an aircraft carrier made of ice. Not regular ice, but pykrete, a mixture of ice and wood pulp that was stronger than steel under very specific conditions. The logic was appealing. Ice doesn't sink, it's cheap, and you can't sink something that's technically already water. In meetings, heads nodded. In reality, things got awkward fast. Ice melts, jet engines are hot, and the ocean does not care about your plans. The British built a prototype and discovered that to keep the ship from melting, it needed a massive refrigeration system running non-stop. In other words, the ship needed industrial-scale air conditioning just to exist. The project was canceled not because it was insane, but because someone finally realized that towing a giant block of ice into the ocean and praying for cold weather might not be a sustainable military strategy. A perfect reminder that unsinkable does not automatically mean worth building. 6. In the early 20th century, when science was still new and radiation was treated like magic, a product called Radithor hit the market as the ultimate health tonic. The formula was beautifully simple distilled water mixed with radium. Drink it to boost energy, restore vitality, and essentially become a better version of yourself. And because it was sold by people in white lab coats with scientific labels, no one questioned the idea of drinking radiation every day. One of its most loyal customers was Eben Byers, who consumed over 1,000 bottles because he believed it made him healthier. It worked in a deeply twisted sense. He began to glow in the dark, then his jaw fell apart. His bones started dissolving from the inside. He died in agony, becoming living, then dying proof that not everything branded as scientific belongs inside the human body. Radithor was eventually banned not because it was unethical, but because people finally accepted that drinking radioactive material for health might be a bad idea, even when the marketing looks extremely convincing. 7. In the early 20th century, car engines had an annoying problem called knocking. Instead of redesigning engines, humanity chose the convenient fix ad lead to gasoline. The results were immediate and fantastic. Engines ran smoother. Performance improved. Engineers applauded. Oil companies smiled. And nobody wanted to hear the rest. Lead is a neurotoxin. This was known since Roman times. But in a collective moment of confidence, the industry decided that if something made engines happier, it probably wouldn't hurt people. Leaded gasoline spread worldwide. Billions of inhaled lead particles daily. Children suffered brain damage. Average IQ dropped. Crime rates rose. The entire planet absorbed a slow, steady dose of poison. It happened gradually enough that no one felt like a direct victim. For decades, companies knew the damage and kept advertising as progress. When leaded gas was finally banned, the world sighed in relief, then realized the damage had already been done. The technology worked perfectly. It just protected engines instead of humans, and that was called innovation. 8. Some inventions are dangerous because they look dangerous, and then there's CFCs dangerous because they were perfect. When invented, CFCs were an industrial dream, odorless, colorless, non-flammable, non-toxic, and incredibly stable. They went into refrigerators, air conditioners, spray cans, and everything that needed cooling. Science declared them completely safe. And because they were so stable, nobody asked the next question stable where it turned out CFCs didn't break down near the ground. They floated into the stratosphere where sunlight triggered reactions that destroyed the ozone layer, the shield protecting Earth from ultraviolet radiation. Ozone holes appeared, skin cancer increased, ecosystems destabilized, and the world stared at the sky, confused how something safe caused this. CFCs weren't banned because they were malicious. They were banned because humanity finally realized that not toxic to us doesn't mean not toxic to the planet. A hard lesson that chemistry doesn't care about advertising, and the atmosphere doesn't read product labels. 9. Thomas Migley Jr. was the kind of genius history both admires and instinctively steps away from. He helped introduce leaded gasoline and CFCs, two inventions that politely poisoned the planet. When he became paralyzed, Midgley didn't wait for assistance. He designed a pulley system around his bed to lift himself up because if you fixed engines in the atmosphere, a bed shouldn't be difficult. The design was elegant, the mechanics were clever, and everything worked until it didn't. One day, the ropes tangled. Instead of lifting him, they tightened around his neck. No manufacturing defect, no sabotage. Just a system optimized by a man who trusted engineering completely. Midgley died by strangulation in his own invention. History calls it irony. The colder truth is, this intelligence doesn't eliminate risk. There was no committee this time, no independent review, and no one asked the familiar question, what if this goes wrong? 10. Juicero arrived at the perfect moment when Silicon Valley believed everything improved once Wi-Fi was involved. It was a $400 juice press, heavy sleek, packed with sensors, software firmware updates, and proprietary juice packets. You insert the packet, close the lid, press a button, and the machine performs its core function, squeezing. Slowly, ceremonially, expensively. Everything was fine until someone asked the question nobody asked in the pitch meetings. What if you just squeeze it by hand? The internet did the rest. Videos showed bare hands producing juice faster, cleaner, and more efficiently than a Wi-Fi-enabled machine. Investor confidence collapsed within hours. The company shut down. Hundreds of millions of dollars vanished because no one tested the simplest solution before writing slides. Juicero didn't fail because the technology was bad. It failed because it solved a problem that didn't exist and made it so complicated no one could defend it. A modern lesson in innovation isn't always progress. Sometimes it's just an expensive way to slow down a hand. 11. In the early 20th century, when weight loss was treated as a problem of willpower rather than nutrition, medicine came up with a very decisive solution. If people won't stop eating, then lock them. That's how the wire cage weight loss mask was born. The device enclosed the wearer's head, entirely secured with a metal lock at the back, allowing breathing but preventing chewing. No reminders, no counseling, no encouragement, just mechanics. The idea sounded extremely effective. If you can't eat, you'll lose weight. And biologically speaking, it worked. The problem was that life involves more than breathing. Wearers couldn't speak properly, couldn't eat in public, and survived on liquids like permanent hospital patients. Yet at the time, this was considered medical progress. Because if strapping a metal cage to someone's face was easier than self-control, science was happy to help. The device wasn't abandoned because it was cruel, but because society slowly realized that turning people into prisoners of their own faces might not be a sustainable health strategy. For a brief moment in history, medicine genuinely believed the best cure for bad habits was simply locking someone's mouth shut. 12. When household technology began to boom, vacuum cleaner, manufacturers felt the pressure to innovate. And someone looked at aviation and thought, if airplanes can float on air, why can't vacuums? The result was the hovering vacuum cleaner lifted off the floor by blasting large amounts of air downward. On paper, it was the future of cleaning. No pushing, no pulling, just effortless gliding. In reality, it behaved like a small hurricane in your living room. The airflow strong enough to lift the machine was also strong enough to blow dust, hair, and everything you were trying to clean right back into the air. Instead of removing dirt, it redistributed it in 3 dimensions. Loud, heavy, and somehow making rooms dirtier after use, the device turned cleaning into an accidental aerodynamics experiment. It vanished from the market not because it lacked creativity, but because it proved an uncomfortable truth. Not all motion is progress. Sometimes technology just takes a simple task, adds jet propulsion, and then acts surprised when everything gets worse. 13. There are many ways to wake a person sound like caffeine. And then someone decided the most effective method was mortal danger. The bullet-firing alarm clock emerged in the early 20th century when invention was basically a competition in boldness. The concept was brutally simple. When the alarm goes off, if you don't wake up, the device fires a small projectile toward a pre-aimed target. On paper, this guarantees immediate alertness because survival instincts are very reliable when you're being shot at. And yes, it worked in the narrowest sense possible. Users woke up instantly. They also woke up to a much bigger question: why is there a gun next to my bed? The device made no distinction between oversleeping and mechanical error. One malfunction, one miscalculated angle, and your morning became an emergency response situation. It wasn't discontinued for lack of imagination, but because society realized the line between motivation and fatal accident was thinner than expected. A rare moment when humanity almost agreed that sleeping in is annoying, but not quite worth getting shot over. 14. Before modern body armor existed, there was a period when science placed great faith in silk. The logic sounded reasonable. Silk fibers are strong, flexible, and under perfect conditions can slow small bullets. Early experiments showed promise, and silk bulletproof vests were promoted as the future of personal protection. On paper, everything worked. In the lab, mostly fine. In real life, not so much. Bullets don't arrive under perfect conditions. Angles change, velocities change, and shooters don't cooperate with scientific assumptions. Silk armor only worked against weak rounds at close range and when the universe was feeling generous. Yet it was sold with the confidence of a complete solution. Wearers believed they were protected, and that belief was the most dangerous part. When the armor failed, the problem wasn't the fabric, but the expectation. History learned an expensive lesson. Luxury materials don't equal safety, and can stop a bullet is very different from should be worn into danger. 15. During the Cold War, one of the British military's greatest fears wasn't just enemy nuclear weapons, it was winter. They designed nuclear landmines to bury underground in case Soviet forces advanced across Europe. The issue was painfully practical. Cold weather could damage the electronics inside. And so in a classified document written with total seriousness, a solution was proposed: put live chickens inside the bomb. The reasoning was scientific. Chickens produce steady body heat, are inexpensive, renewable, and require no electricity. Just feed them, water them, and let them keep the components warm. The plan was detailed enough to include care instructions for the chickens during standby periods. In theory, it was a perfect biological heating system. In reality, it revealed how far humans were willing to go when anxiety met engineering. The project was never deployed, not because anyone worried about the chickens, but because someone realized there were too many things that could go wrong when global security depended on whether a few chickens stayed alive on schedule. Sometimes science doesn't fail. It just goes so far that no one remembers to look back. 16. Before IQ became a number, there was a time when science believed intelligence could be measured by the shape of your skull. Phrenology claimed that mental traits lived in specific regions of the brain, and that by feeling bumps and indentations on the head, you could determine whether someone was intelligent, criminal, or morally deficient. It sounded convenient, and because it was convenient, it spread fast. Self-proclaimed experts traveled around confidently measuring people's heads with rulers like early MRI machines powered entirely by vibes. On paper, this was science. In reality, it became a tool for racism, class discrimination, and legalized prejudice. A bad head shape meant you were inferior. A correct one meant opportunity. No evidence required just a skull. Phrenology didn't cause harm because it was wrong. It caused harm because people believed it. When real neuroscience advanced, the theory collapsed quickly. The damage, however, lasted much longer. Lives had already been shaped by imaginary bumps. A classic lesson for every era: when fake science wears the costume of real science, it doesn't just fail, it gives ignorance authority and calls it objectivity. 17. In the early 20th century, when medicine believed electricity could fix everything from mood to personality, stuttering was added to the list of conditions treatable with electric shock. The logic was clean and terrifying. Stuttering comes from faulty brain signals, so send back stronger ones. Devices were built with a simple rule: every time a patient stuttered, a mild electric shock was delivered. In theory, the brain would learn to avoid the mistake, and it worked in a deeply troubling way. Patients spoke far less. Not because they became fluent, but because they no longer wanted to open their mouths. The treatment didn't create better speakers, it created quieter ones. Early reports praised behavioral improvement, quietly ignoring the fact that fear had replaced communication. The method was eventually abandoned when medicine accepted that speech is not a switch you can flip with electricity. A familiar lesson: if you teach the brain with pain, don't be surprised when it chooses the safest option, doing nothing at all. 18. In modern warfare, humans constantly search for ways to protect soldiers from chemical weapons. And then someone remembered that armies also have dogs. Mine detection dogs, messenger dogs, rescue dogs, extremely useful. So gas masks for dogs were invented, driven by a genuinely humane goal: protecting four-legged allies from chemical battlefields. On paper, the design made sense: a fitted mask, air filters, and secure straps. In reality, one variable was underestimated: dogs. Dogs don't understand war. Dogs don't care about design. And dogs especially don't enjoy having things strapped to their faces. During tests, many reacted by ripping the mask off, chewing the straps, rolling on the ground, or freezing in total protest. Some tolerated it for a few seconds, just long enough to prove the theory wasn't entirely wrong. But battlefields don't operate in seconds. The project faded away, not because it lacked compassion, but because reality intervened. You can train dogs to do many things. Convincing them to cooperate with engineers is a different challenge. A moment in history when technology lost to instinct and humans learned that even good ideas require willing participants. 19. There was a brief era in safety engineering when inventors decided the problem with life jackets was that they weren't serious enough. Instead of fabric, rubber, or lightweight materials, they chose metal. The reasoning sounded logical if you stopped halfway through. Metal is strong, durable, puncture-resistant, and looks extremely trustworthy. Metal life jackets were built to resemble miniature armor, promising protection from waves, impact, and the ocean itself. One small detail was overlooked. Metal is heavy, and water does not negotiate with gravity. Once in the water, the vest didn't help you float. It helped you sink efficiently. Early tests revealed that the jacket performed exactly one function well, delivering the wearer to the bottom faster. Yet for a short time it was marketed with absolute confidence because it looked safe. A classic reminder that feeling protected is not the same as being protected. The metal life jacket didn't fail because of poor craftsmanship. It failed because the ocean doesn't care what you're wearing, and physics is not impressed by shiny materials. 20. Humans have always dreamed of shortening their commute, and someone eventually asked, what if cars could fly? That's how the flying car with wings was born, a bold fusion of automobile, airplane, and extreme self-confidence. The concept was seductive drive to a runway deploy, the wings take off and land near home. No traffic, no airports, no waiting. On blueprints, it was the future of personal transportation. In reality, it was an engineer's nightmare. Cars are too heavy to fly safely. Wings were too small to generate stable lift. Drivers needed to be pilots and motorists at the same time and couldn't afford to be bad at either. A small mistake in the air isn't like one on the road. There's no shoulder to pull over onto. Many prototypes managed to take off, fly briefly, and then end in decisive crashes. The idea didn't die from lack of creativity. It died because it demanded the impossible, turning every driver into a pilot and trusting no one would forget that the sky has no brakes. A familiar lesson in technological history. Saving time is nice, but not if the cost is your life. 21. Before YouTube existed, humans already had a strong desire to watch other people risk their lives for entertainment. That's how the human cannonball was born. The idea was simple and terrifying stuff. A person into a giant cannon, launch them through the air, have them land in a net, and call it performance art. On posters, it was a spectacular display of courage and engineering. In reality, it was a math problem with zero tolerance for error. No backup engine, no brakes. No, we'll try again next time. Too little force and the performer falls short. Too much force and they overshoot. Both outcomes are very final. For decades, these shows continued because audiences loved the tension of knowing that tonight could be someone's last night. The human cannon didn't disappear because of a lack of volunteers, but because society slowly agreed that entertainment shouldn't depend entirely on whether physics feels merciful. It's the perfect example of an idea with no plan B, because if you ever need plan B, plan A has already killed someone. 22. For a long time, humans believed their own bodies were more reliable weather stations than any machine, especially their knees. Weather forecasting by joint pain emerged from the sincere belief that if your joints hurt, rain was coming. And because enough people were right a few times, the idea gained semi-scientific status. No satellites, no air pressure data, just an older person standing up and saying, "I feel it in my bones." In theory, this was folk wisdom. In practice, it mostly measured age and general humidity. Joints hurt for many reasons, weather fatigue, inflammation, or simply because it's Monday. Yet for a while, people seriously believed personal discomfort could represent the sky itself. This was a moment in history when science nearly gave way to vibes, and weather forecasting almost became a profession requiring life experience instead of data. The sky kept doing its thing. The knees kept hurting, rain or not. 23. When household robots first appeared, humans believed they were finally free from cleaning. The idea was beautiful robots would work tirelessly precisely without complaining. And they did work tirelessly too tirelessly. Some early cleaning robots were programmed with a single goal: clean. There was no concept of that's enough. No fatigue. No intuition that continuing might cause damage. The robot kept vacuuming, scrubbing, repeating until carpets frayed. Furniture shifted, cables stretched, and the room looked worse than before it was cleaned. Homeowners weren't betrayed by their robots. They were betrayed by robots that followed instructions too perfectly. While humans stop when things look fine, robots only know the task isn't finished until told otherwise. This was the moment people realized automation isn't dangerous because it's smart, but because it doesn't know when to stop. The robot doesn't hate your house. It's just doing exactly what you asked until nothing is left intact. 24. Security obsession has always fueled invention, sometimes a little too enthusiastically. The electric shock burglar alarm was born from a decisive idea: if someone breaks in, make them regret it immediately. The system delivered an electric shock upon unauthorized contact. On paper, it was a perfect deterrence. In reality, there was one small but fatal issue: the system didn't know who the burglar was. It only knew who touched it. Homeowners forgot codes, brushed the wrong contact point, or entered their own homes absent-mindedly and received an unexpected lesson in electricity. The device protected the property very well, in the sense that it attacked everyone equally. Burglars got shocked. Owners did too, sometimes more often. Eventually, society agreed that security systems shouldn't include the possibility of incapacitating the very person they're meant to protect. A simple lesson: if your defense system can't tell you from the threat, the problem isn't crime, it's design. 25. There was a time when society began taking child safety more seriously, and some inventors decided to solve the problem in a very literal way. The child's helmet with a leash was created to protect kids' heads and help adults maintain control. On paper, it was a perfect combination of safety and convenience. The child wears a helmet to avoid injury. The adult holds a strap to prevent wandering. The issue wasn't physics, it was optics. When a child is tethered by the head and guided like carry-on luggage, society starts to feel uncomfortable. Yes, the child is safer. But bystanders can't help wondering, is this safety equipment or obedience training gear? The product wasn't abandoned because it didn't work, but because it made everyone too uneasy to look at. A classic example of a product that solves a technical problem while creating a much bigger social one. The feeling that we've turned parenting into a spectacle no one wants to watch for very long. 26. In aviation history, some designs fail due to a lack of lift, a lack of power, or a lack of funding. And then there's the flying saucer aircraft failed because of its shape. The idea sounded futuristic: a circular plane resembling a UFO, capable of vertical takeoff, agile rotation, and minimal runway needs. On blueprints, it was the future of warfare and transportation. In reality, aerodynamics objected. Some prototypes actually managed to lift off just enough to excite engineers, but takeoff was never the hard part. Landing was where reality arrived. The saucer-shaped aircraft was extremely unstable, vibrated violently, reacted slowly, and had a tendency to do things pilots never asked it to do. Every landing became a tense negotiation with physics. The project was canceled not due to lack of vision, but because no one wanted to fly in a vehicle where the most dangerous part begins, right when you think you're safe. A moment in history when humanity learned that looking like the future doesn't mean you get to survive until tomorrow. 27. When personal technology exploded, someone looked at military submarines and thought, why isn't this for individuals? That's how the personal torpedo-shaped submarine was born: small, sleek, polished, and radiating questionable confidence. The idea was seductive. One person, one sealed capsule, a private dive into the depths. No crew, no noise, no inconvenience. The design flaw was something the military never ignores: emergency exits. When everything worked, the submarine performed smoothly. When something went wrong, the only option was to remain inside. No escape hatch, no plan B. The ocean doesn't care whether you're a tourist or an inventor. Pressure increases steadily. Oxygen decreases steadily. Time is not on your side. Some models worked under ideal conditions, just enough to create false confidence. Reality proved otherwise. A clear lesson from the history of personal tech: if your vehicle looks like a torpedo, it probably inherits the torpedo's single-use philosophy. 28. Before electric heating became common, people faced winter very directly. And someone came up with a solution that made perfect sense for about 5 seconds: coal-heated jackets. The idea was simple: place smoldering hot coals into pockets sewn into the coat to keep warm. No batteries, no electricity, real heat, instant warmth. On paper, it was survival meets fashion. In reality, it turned the wearer into a mobile fire hazard. Hot coals don't respect stitching. One sudden movement, a gust of wind, or a moment of distraction was enough for the jacket to start burning from the inside. Users stayed warm while constantly wondering if they were actively smoking. The product didn't disappear for lack of creativity, but because society eventually agreed that staying warm shouldn't come with a built-in self-immolation feature. A clear example that sometimes technology doesn't fail because it's too cold, but because it's way too hot. 29. The early 20th century was a time when humanity had just discovered electricity and immediately decided it could do everything. That's how mind-reading machines were born. The idea sounded scientific: attach electrodes to the head measure. Brain signals decode thoughts. On paper, it was a breakthrough in neuroscience. In reality, the machines mostly detected electrical noise, sweat muscle movement, and anything except actual thoughts. That didn't stop inventors from claiming they could see into your mind. Dials twitched, needles jumped, and operators nodded as if witnessing cosmic truth. Strong signals meant deep thinking. Weak ones meant mental emptiness. No verification, no baseline. Just a deep belief that the human brain would cooperate with wires and analog gauges. Eventually, these machines were abandoned when real science advanced and said plainly the brain is far more complicated. A moment in history when humanity nearly confused understanding the mind with watching blinking lights and convincing itself it knew everything. 30. Some inventions come from scientific curiosity, others are from practical needs. And then there are inventions born from moral panic. Mechanical anti-masturbation devices belong firmly in the last category. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, certain doctors and moral authorities believed the behavior caused severe physical and mental harm. Their solution wasn't education or counseling, but mechanical enforcement. Devices were designed to cause discomfort or physically prevent the act, especially during sleep. It sounds like dark satire, but these devices were patented with complete seriousness, complete with technical drawings and formal descriptions. No one asked whether users wanted them. No one questioned whether the problem even existed. The goal was simply prevention. Looking back, this wasn't a failure of engineering, it was a failure of thinking. When society becomes terrified of a natural behavior, it will happily build elaborate machines to solve a problem that never required machinery in the first place. A clear reminder that not all inventions are driven by progress, some are driven by fear, carefully wrapped in scientific language. Outro. After all these stories, one thing becomes clear. History is never short on confident people. Ideas are proposed, defended, approved, and implemented, then leave traces no one expected. Some vanish quickly. Some cause damage that lasts for generations. Others remain as quiet reminders that intelligence does not grant immunity from error. So which idea made you pause the longest? Which one made you think someone really signed off on this? Or is there another invention you've heard of, seen, or once believed made sense? Until you looked back, pick one. Add your own example. Because chances are those reactions are the most interesting part that continues long after history has turned the page.